Thank you for joining us at the CDO Exchange today, Sheila. Please could you tell us a bit about yourself and a bit about your role?
Sure. My name is Sheila FitzPatrick, obviously, and I'm the Chief Privacy Officer and Worldwide Data Governance Counsel at NetApp. And I've been an international privacy attorney for the last 35 years.
With regards to the GDPR and data governance, could you give us some information about the challenges facing CDOs in the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, GDPR is going to impact every organization regardless of where they are in the world, and certainly the CDO, their responsibility is the entire life cycle of every type of data that an organization holds, personal data being a key component. And some of the challenges they're going to be looking at is the legality of having the data. Are they allowed to keep it? What are they doing with that data? Are they using it only for the purpose for which they were given that data? Are they taking liberties with it? So they really have to look at the foundational level of what does the internal privacy program look at within their organization. And then after they've built that foundation and they can legally allow to have that data and they've defined how they're going to use it, then they need to look at the tools and technology that allow them to maintain ongoing compliance with GDPR.
As ever, there's no silver bullet to all these challenges. So what would you say would be your best advice to the solutions to these?
Well, you're right. There's no main bullet, but as I said, the key point that organizations need to recognize, and especially CDOs, is that GDPR is first and foremost a legal compliance issue. It's not an IT issue. IT is a partner in the ongoing solution, the ongoing ability to maintain compliance. But the silver bullet, or probably the one key point that people are missing, is that what is the foundation of your data privacy program? Do you have binding corporate rules in place? Do you use model contractual clauses? How do you acquire personal data? Are you transparent about what you're doing? Do you have clear notifications and consents in place? So it's really looking at the foundational level and the legal aspect. Tools and technology will help later, but you can't start there. I always use the analogy, if you start looking at GDPR strictly with tools and technology, you're building a house starting at the second floor. You have to build the ground floor and the first floor first.
What advice would you give to those that are behind in their GDPR preparations?
So what I'd say to them first is, first of all, find who the chief privacy officer is. If you don't have one, find out who in the organization is responsible for privacy. And then look at what do you have in place? What do your notifications look like? What policies do you have in place? What's your rationale and your legal requirement for obtaining data? How transparent have you been with employees, customers, partners when you're collecting that data? Look at what data you are collecting and what do you actually need that data for. So do an assessment of what you're collecting and why you're collecting it. And that doesn't mean start by bringing in e-discovery tools or data classification tools. Again, those are important later on, but you have to start with the foundation and the basics of what do we need to run this organization? What data do we need to manage the employment relationship? Meet with the functional people. So HR is the only one who's going to tell you what they need in order to run the business. If you're talking to the finance department, what personal data does finance need in order to manage the internal relationship and the external relationship with customers and clients?
Moving to the UK now, how much will Brexit have an impact?
Well, Brexit's going to be interesting, obviously, because more than likely GDPR will go in effect prior to Brexit going into full force. So the UK will still be part of the EU when it goes into force. And the way I've been explaining to people is that regardless of what happens and regardless of whether or not the UK government actually adopts the requirements of GDPR, really isn't as critical to organizations as is the fact that every organization is going to have to comply. So they can't wait for the UK government to say, okay, we're going to adopt GDPR, or ICO is going to enhance the current EU Data Protection Act to meet the requirements of GDPR, because companies don't have time to wait. They have the responsibility for complying regardless of what the government does. So Brexit might impact where companies are storing data in terms of having data centers in the UK, but that's going to really tie back to how transparent are you with your customers and your employees about where you're storing that data and obtaining their consent and sharing with them, the fact that the data is here and how it's being protected and how the organization complies with GDPR. I use an analogy, it would be like storing data in the U.S. The U.S. data protection laws are not anywhere near equivalent to what you see in the EU, and certainly not anywhere near what you see with GDPR. But companies have to comply with GDPR, regardless of where they operate. So the same will be true for companies in the UK.
And finally, what advice would you give to those that are ahead in their GDPR preparations?
The advice I'd give them is definitely if they started the path, continue it, but go back and make sure that they started that path looking at the foundational level and the legal compliance platform, as opposed to thinking that they're going down the path starting by looking at tools and technology. Because again, although those are so important, that's building a house at the second floor. You can't start with looking at your security profile, having encryption in place, looking how long you store data, if you don't legally have permission to collect that data to begin with and use it for the purpose for which you're using it. So the advice would be keep going, but go back and make sure you started at the foundational point.
Some great insight there, Sheila, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, I appreciate it.